You know that feeling when your heart is pounding so hard, you can actually hear it in your ears? That's exactly what I felt, standing in the doorway of the Marriott Ballroom. 20 years. 20 years since I'd seen these people. 20 years since they'd thrown me out, like I was nothing. But here's the thing. They had no idea who I'd become. I looked down at my outfit. Deliberately torn jeans. A faded t-shirt from Goodwill. Scuffed sneakers that had seen better days. I looked broke. Homeless, even. And that was exactly the point. Because across the room, there he was. Uncle Richard. The man who had destroyed my family. The man who had taken everything from us and smiled while he did it. He was wearing a designer suit, probably cost more than most people make in a month. His wife, my Aunt Linda, dripping in jewelry, laughing at something someone said. They looked successful, powerful, untouchable. But I knew something they didn't. I knew their secret. The room was buzzing with conversation. Family members I hadn't seen in decades, cousins, aunts, uncles, all of them doing exactly what they always did. Comparing bank accounts. Showing off their latest purchases. Making sure everyone knew exactly where they stood on the family hierarchy. And at the bottom of that hierarchy, there I was. Or at least, that's what they thought. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, just a little. Not from fear, though. From excitement. From anticipation. Because I'd been waiting for this moment for 20 long years. You see, revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is watching someone's entire world crumble in complete silence. I stepped into the room, and I waited, because Uncle Richard was about to learn something very important. Something about karma. Something about what happens when you mess with the wrong person. He just didn't know it yet. Let me take you back to the beginning of this mess. I was 8 years old when my father died. Cancer. It was brutal, it was fast, and it left my mother completely destroyed. Not just emotionally, but financially. See, my dad had been the breadwinner. Mom had never worked, not a single day in her entire life. She'd married young, had me, and lived the perfect suburban housewife dream. Until that dream became a nightmare. The medical bills were crushing us. The mortgage was 3 months behind. We had maybe 2 weeks of food left in the house. And that's when Uncle Richard, my dad's older brother, swooped in. Now, Uncle Richard wasn't just wealthy. He was obscenely wealthy. Real estate empire, multiple businesses, vacation homes in 3 different states. The kind of money where you don't even look at price tags anymore. And he knew we were desperate. I remember the day he came over. Mom was crying at the kitchen table, bills spread out everywhere. I was sitting on the stairs, listening through the banister. Uncle Richard walked in like he owned the place, which, honestly, he basically did at that point. "Sarah," he said to my mother, his voice all fake sympathy, "I want to help. I really do. But you have to understand, charity doesn't help anyone in the long run." Charity. He called helping his dead brother's family charity. "I'll make you a deal," he continued. "I'll buy the house from you. Fair market value. You can stay here for 6 months, get back on your feet. Find a job. Figure things out." Mom was so grateful, she was practically kissing his feet. "Oh, Richard, thank you. Thank you so much." But I saw the look in his eyes. Even at 8 years old, I could tell something was wrong. 3 weeks later, we got the eviction notice. Turns out, Uncle Richard had lied about the fair market value. He'd paid Mom about 30% of what the house was actually worth. And that 6-month grace period? It was never legally binding. Just a verbal promise from a man who didn't believe in keeping promises. We ended up in a 1-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town. Mom got a job at a diner, working double shifts just to keep us afloat. I went from private school to a public school where the ceiling leaked and half the textbooks were missing pages. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was family gatherings. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday party, there we'd be. The charity cases. Mom would show up in her one nice dress, the same dress every single time. I'd wear clothes from Walmart, while my cousins showed off their designer everything. And Uncle Richard? He loved it. He loved watching us squirm. He'd make these little comments, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, Sarah, still working at that diner? Well, honest work is honest work, I suppose." Or to me, "How's school going, sweetie? I know it's not the same quality education you used to get, but we all have to make sacrifices." The family would laugh. Not mean laughter, exactly, more like uncomfortable chuckling. But they never defended us. They never said anything. They just watched. And slowly, over the years, we got invited to fewer and fewer things. Until eventually, we weren't invited at all. I was 16 when Uncle Richard made his final move. Mom had saved up enough money, just barely enough, to put a down payment on a small house. Nothing fancy, just a tiny 2-bedroom place where we could finally have some stability. She was so excited. I hadn't seen her smile like that since before Dad died. The day before we were supposed to close on the house, Uncle Richard made a cash offer. $20,000 over asking price. No inspections, no contingencies. The seller couldn't say no. Mom cried for 3 days straight. That's when I made a promise to myself. Someday, somehow, I was going to make Uncle Richard pay for every single thing he'd done to us. I just had to figure out how. Let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from. I'd love to know. College was my escape route. I worked 3 jobs, scholarships covered the rest, and I got into Stanford Business School. Not because I loved business, but because I wanted to understand money. Real money. The kind of money that Uncle Richard used as a weapon. I studied his world. Real estate, investments, corporate law, everything he thought he knew better than everyone else. And you know what I discovered? Uncle Richard wasn't actually that smart. He'd inherited most of his wealth from my grandfather. Then he'd gotten lucky with some property deals in the 80s, when the market was practically giving away money. But his actual business decisions? Pretty mediocre. He was just a bully with a trust fund. After graduation, I moved to New York. Started working for a top investment firm. Worked 80-hour weeks. Lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet. Ate ramen for dinner most nights. But I was building something. A reputation. Connections. And most importantly, capital. Mom passed away when I was 28. Heart attack. The stress of those 20 years, it had finally caught up with her. Uncle Richard didn't even come to the funeral. That's when I really got serious. I started my own investment company. Small at first, just me and one assistant in a rented office space. But I had something Uncle Richard never had. I was hungry. Desperate, even. And desperate people, they work harder than comfortable people. 10 years later, I was managing over $200 million in assets. I had offices in 3 cities, a team of 40 employees, and a reputation for turning failing businesses into gold mines. But I still dressed down when I went back home. Still drove my old Honda. Still let people think I was just getting by, because I wasn't ready yet. I was waiting for the perfect moment. And then, the invitation arrived. The Henderson family reunion. Fancy cardstock, gold lettering. Join us for a weekend celebration at the Marriott Grand Ballroom. There was a little note at the bottom, handwritten by someone I didn't recognize. We know it's been a long time, but family is family. Hope you can make it. Family is family. After 20 years of being treated like we didn't exist, now they wanted to play happy family. I almost threw the invitation away. But then, I had an idea. I called my assistant. Cancel my meetings for next weekend. And get me everything you can find on Richard Henderson's current financial situation. What she found was interesting. Very interesting. See, Uncle Richard's luck had finally run out. The real estate market had shifted. Some of his bigger investments had gone south. He'd made some questionable decisions with other people's money. Nothing illegal exactly, but ethically gray. And then there was the big one. 3 years ago, Uncle Richard had convinced half the family to invest in one of his development projects. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people had put their retirement savings into this thing. He'd promised them guaranteed returns. Told them it was a can't-miss opportunity. The project had failed. Spectacularly. Most of the family had lost everything. Their savings, their retirement funds, their kids' college money. All of it gone. But Uncle Richard? He'd made sure his own money was protected. Through a maze of LLCs and shell companies, he'd structured the deal so that when things went bad, everyone else took the hit. Everyone except him. The family was furious, but they couldn't prove anything. The contracts were ironclad. Technically, Uncle Richard hadn't broken any laws. He'd just screwed over his entire family. And the best part? Most of them still didn't know the full extent of what he'd done. They knew they'd lost their money, but they didn't know it was because Uncle Richard had deliberately protected himself at their expense. But I knew. Because I'd spent 3 days digging through public records, corporate filings, and financial documents. I knew exactly what he'd done, and I could prove it. I smiled as I looked at that invitation again. Family is family. Oh, Uncle Richard. You have no idea how right you are. I went shopping that weekend. But not for a nice outfit. I went to Goodwill. Found the most pathetic clothes I could. Ripped jeans, faded t-shirt, beaten-up sneakers. I wanted to look broken, defeated. I wanted them to see me and feel sorry for me, just like they always had. Because the best revenge starts with your enemy's guard being completely down. Before I tell you what I did next, if you're enjoying the story, please subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. I walked into that ballroom, like a ghost returning from the dead. The first person to see me was my cousin Jennifer. She did a double take, like she couldn't believe her eyes. Then she whispered something to the person next to her. And just like that, the whispers started spreading across the room. Is that really her? Oh my God, look at those clothes. She looks awful. Perfect. I made my way slowly, deliberately, across the room. People were staring. Some looked curious. Others looked pitiful, like they felt sorry for me. The exact reaction I wanted. Uncle Richard was standing near the bar, holding court with a group of relatives, telling some story, probably about one of his business deals. He was laughing, that same condescending laugh I remembered from childhood. He hadn't seen me yet. I grabbed a glass of water from a passing waiter and waited. I wanted the perfect moment. The moment when everyone would be listening. That moment came about 10 minutes later. Uncle Richard tapped his glass with a fork. The room went quiet. I'd like to make a toast, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. To family. To success. To all of us who've worked hard and achieved the American dream. People raised their glasses. They were smiling, nodding, eating up every word. But I noticed something. Not everyone was smiling. Some of the faces in the crowd looked strained, worried, angry even. These were the people who'd lost their money in his failed development project. Some of us have faced challenges, Uncle Richard continued. Some of us have struggled. But the key to success is never giving up. never letting circumstances define who you are. He was looking around the room as he spoke. And then, his eyes found mine. He stopped mid-sentence. For just a second, maybe two, he looked genuinely shocked. Like he was seeing a ghost. Then his expression shifted into that familiar look of pity. Well, he said, his voice getting louder. Look who decided to join us. The entire room turned to look at me. 60 pairs of eyes, all focused on the girl in the ripped jeans and faded t-shirt. Everyone, Uncle Richard announced, like he was introducing a circus act. I'd like you all to meet my niece, Sarah's daughter. I haven't seen her in, oh, how long has it been? 20 years. People were whispering again. Some looked confused. Others looked embarrassed. Like they weren't sure whether to acknowledge me or pretend I wasn't there. Come here, sweetheart, Uncle Richard called out, his voice dripping with fake concern. Don't be shy. Let everyone see how you've been managing. The word managing hit me like a slap. He was doing it again. Making me feel small. Making me feel less than. But this time, I was ready. I walked toward him slowly. Each step deliberate. Calculated. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. Hello, Uncle Richard, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Thank you for the warm welcome. He smiled that condescending smile. Of course, honey. Family is family, right? We're just concerned about you. You look like you've been having a tough time. More whispers. More pitying looks. Actually, I said, reaching into my back pocket. I've been doing quite well. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. I brought you something. A little gift. Uncle Richard looked confused. What is it? I unfolded the paper slowly, dramatically. It's a copy of the incorporation documents for Meridian Development, LLC. The color drained from his face. You remember Meridian, don't you, Uncle Richard? The development project that lost everyone their money. The room was dead silent now. You could hear a pin drop. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice was shaking. Oh, I think you do. I smiled, and for the first time in 20 years, it was a genuine smile. See, I've been doing some research. And I discovered something interesting. I looked around the room, at all the faces that had lost money in his scheme. Did you all know that Uncle Richard structured the Meridian deal so that his own investment was protected by something called a senior secured position ? More confused looks. What that means, I continued, my voice getting stronger. Is that when the project failed? Uncle Richard got his money back first. Before any of you. In fact, he didn't lose a single penny. Now people were starting to look angry. That's not. Uncle Richard was stammering. But that's not the best part, I said, reaching into my other pocket. I pulled out another document. This is a copy of an insurance policy that Uncle Richard took out on the Meridian project. A policy that paid out $2.7 million when the project was declared a total loss. The room erupted. What? Are you serious? Richard, is this true? Uncle Richard looked like he was about to faint. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and for the first time in his entire life, he had nothing to say. So while all of you lost your retirement savings, I continued, my voice carrying over the chaos. Uncle Richard actually made money. Nearly $3 million from your misery. The crowd was turning ugly now. People were shouting, demanding answers. Moving closer to Uncle Richard, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Who are you? He whispered. I smiled again. I'm Sarah's daughter. Remember? The charity case. The one you've been managing for the last 20 years. I reached into my jacket and pulled out one final document. My business card. I handed it to him. He looked at it, and his legs actually gave out. He had to grab the bar to keep from falling. Because printed on that card, in simple black letters, was my name, my title, and the name of my company. The company that now owned every single one of his properties. You should have seen his face when he read that business card. Mackenzie Capital Management, he whispered, like he was reading his own death sentence. Managing partner, 200 million in assets. His voice trailed off. He looked up at me, and for the first time in his entire life, Uncle Richard looked terrified. That's impossible, he said, but his voice was barely audible. You're nobody. You're poor. I finished for him. Worthless? A charity case. The room was still buzzing with angry voices. People were demanding explanations. Someone was on their phone, probably calling their lawyer. But I only had eyes for Uncle Richard. See, Uncle Richard, while you were busy counting your blood money, I was building something. Something real. Something that didn't require screwing over my own family. I pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I brought up the documentation I'd prepared. 3 months ago, your mortgage company sold your debt to a private investment firm. Care to guess which firm that was? He was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Mackenzie Capital Management, I said slowly. My company. Which means I now own the paper on your house, your office building, your vacation home in the Hamptons. All of it. Uncle Richard's wife, Linda, had pushed through the crowd. She grabbed his arm, her face white with panic. Richard, what is she talking about? What debt? You said we owned everything outright. We do, he said weakly. Actually, I interrupted. You don't. See, Uncle Richard here took out several loans against your properties over the past 5 years. Big loans. To cover his gambling debts. Linda looked like she'd been slapped. Gambling debts? Richard, you promised me you'd stopped. The crowd was getting louder. More accusatory. People were sharing stories, comparing notes, realizing just how deep Uncle Richard's deception went. But I wasn't finished. The best part, I continued, is that all of those loans are now in default. Have been for 6 months. Which means, legally, I can foreclose whenever I want. Uncle Richard was gripping the bar so hard, his knuckles were white. What do you want? He whispered. Justice, I said simply. For my mother. For everyone in this room who trusted you. For every single person you've screwed over for the last 30 years. I looked around the room at all the faces. Some angry. Some confused. Some hopeful. Here's what's going to happen, I announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every person in this room who lost money in the Meridian project is going to get it back. With interest. 20% interest, compounded annually. The room went quiet again. The money will come from the sale of Uncle Richard's properties. The house, the office building, the vacation homes, everything. And whatever's left over will be donated to charity. Specifically, to help families who've been devastated by predatory lending practices. Uncle Richard was shaking his head. You can't do this. I'm family. I laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in years. Family? I said. Family is family, right? Isn't that what you said when you threw us out? When you stole our house? When you made sure we were never invited to another gathering? The room was dead silent now. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. You know what the difference is between you and me, Uncle Richard? I asked, stepping closer to him. When I had nothing, I worked for everything. I earned it. I built something real. But you? You've never created anything in your entire life. You've just taken from your own family, from people who trusted you. I pulled out my phone again and showed him the screen. The foreclosure papers have already been filed. You have 30 days to vacate all properties. The sale will be handled by my legal team. And the first checks to the Meridian investors will be mailed out within 60 days. Linda was crying now. Actual tears streaming down her face. Where are we supposed to go? She whispered. I looked at her, and for just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. But then I remembered all those years of watching my mother cry herself to sleep. All those nights we ate cereal for dinner, because that's all we could afford. I don't know, I said quietly, but I'm sure you'll manage. Uncle Richard tried one last desperate play. He looked around the room, at the crowd of relatives. Don't listen to her, he said, his voice getting louder. She's lying. This is all revenge. She's trying to destroy our family. But nobody was listening to him anymore. Because they'd seen the documents. They'd heard the truth. And they were angry. My cousin Jennifer, the one who'd whispered about my clothes, walked up to Uncle Richard. Is it true? She asked. About the insurance money? About the protected investment? Uncle Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. My kids' college fund was in that project, Jennifer continued, her voice shaking with rage. 20 years of savings. Gone. And you knew it would fail. Other people started stepping forward. Aunt Margaret, who'd lost her retirement. Cousin David, who'd had to sell his house. One by one, they confronted him. And Uncle Richard, the man who'd spent 30 years, making everyone else feel small, just stood there. Silent. Defeated. I watched for a few more minutes, then quietly slipped toward the exit. My work here was done. As I reached the door, I heard Uncle Richard call out behind me. Wait, he said, his voice broken. Please. We can work something out. I'll pay everyone back. I promise. I turned around, one last time. You know what, Uncle Richard? I said. You're right. We are family. And family should help each other out. He looked hopeful for just a second. So here's my help, I continued. I'm teaching you the most valuable lesson you'll ever learn. Actions have consequences. And karma? Karma always comes around. I walked out of that ballroom and I never looked back. 3 weeks later, I got the first text message. Please, it said. We need to talk. We can fix this. Richard, I deleted it. Then came the calls, the emails, the letters, all from different family members, begging me to reconsider, telling me I was being unreasonable. I ignored them all. 6 months later, the checks went out. Every single person who'd lost money in the Meridian project got their full investment back, plus the 20% interest I'd promised. The thank you cards started arriving immediately. You know what the funny thing is? I never actually wanted revenge. Not really. What I wanted was justice. There's a difference. Revenge is personal. It's about making someone suffer because they made you suffer. But justice? Justice is about making things right. About restoring balance. For 20 years, Uncle Richard had used his wealth and power to make people feel small, to take advantage of their trust, to profit from their desperation. And for 20 years, nobody had stopped him, because nobody could stop him. Until me. The last I heard, Uncle Richard and Linda were living in a small apartment across town. He'd gotten a job at a car dealership, selling used cars, making maybe $40,000 a year. It's honest work. The kind of work he used to look down on. Linda divorced him about 8 months after the reunion. Took half of what little he had left, which wasn't much. She moved back in with her sister. Some people might say, I went too far. That I was cruel. That family should forgive family. But here's what I learned from my 20 years in the business world. Sometimes, The only way to stop a bully is to become stronger than they are. Sometimes, the only language they understand is power. And sometimes, justice looks a lot like revenge. My mother never got to see Uncle Richard get his comeuppance. She never got to see her daughter succeed. But I like to think, wherever she is, she's proud of what I accomplished. Not the money, not the success, but the fact that I didn't let them break me. The fact that when life knocked me down, I got back up, and I fought back. The reunion was 3 years ago now. I still get Christmas cards from some of the family members. The ones who got their money back, who were able to save their retirements, send their kids to college, keep their homes. They're grateful. And that means everything. As for Uncle Richard, I heard through the grapevine that he tried to start his own business again. Some kind of consulting firm. It failed within 6 months. Turns out, when you don't have other people's money to play with, success is a lot harder to come by. The truth is, I could have destroyed him completely. I had enough information, enough leverage, to make sure he never worked again. To make sure he lost everything. But I didn't. Because that would have been revenge. Instead, I just leveled the playing field. I made sure that the people he'd hurt got made whole. And I made sure he learned what it felt like to start over with nothing. Just like my mother and I had to do 20 years ago. That's not revenge. That's education. And sometimes, the best lessons are the hardest ones to learn. If you liked this story, check out this other one on the screen. It's about a woman who discovered her husband had been living a double life. And what she did about it will shock you. See you there.